Welcome everybody to Justice Serve Daily. Appreciate you guys being here. I'd like to thank my mods who are already here, of course, Mama Bear and Jinx. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And I am excited today. My true crime crush or love of the murder sheet, as some of you who know me closely, I like to call them my heart-to-heart couple. And I'm just thrilled to have them here. So let's welcome them on board here. Hello, Kevin and Anya.
Hi, JSD. It's great to see you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
It is great to have you guys. So if you don't know, again, I'm welcoming Anya Kane and Kevin Greenlee. They are the co-creators of the Murder Sheet podcast and co-authors of the newly released, much anticipated book of Shadow of the Bridge. And I just want to say, I guess I'll say this ahead of time. I don't do drama, so if anybody came here to be drama, my beautiful mods will remove you from any rudeness and drama. I don't go there. That's not my kind of channel. There are plenty of channels that do that, so I welcome you to go join them. But one reason that I bring Anya and Kevin onto is because of the integrity and level of class that both of them have, and that I trust in the work that they do, and have so much respect for them of what information that they do share. They know they've confirmed and get sources and everything for, and they're very professional and way beyond others who have covered this case before. But that's the reason that I bring them on, because I believe that. I know I've had some people who said, oh my God. Well, I was like, if you choose not to watch, don't watch. You don't have to be here, right? Everybody chooses whether you're here or not. So I guess the first thing that I kind of like to ask you guys is, I know for the murder sheet, you other crimes that you've covered have been generally cold cases and obviously restaurant driven, which the Speedway murders, got to listen to that if you haven't, because that's a good one. But with the Delphi murder case, it was an active and developing case this time that you guys were working with. So what did you experience differently with Delphi that when you were doing your other cases that may have been a surprise to you? Or I know, my God, you guys, there was so much breaking news. You guys seem to be doing more podcasts than normal because of all kinds of things. I know I had the same instance too. You'd try to prepare for a show and then something else would happen. But what was the differences for that between Delphi and the previous cases you've covered?
Well, first of all, JSD, thank you so much for the lovely introduction. We absolutely respect the work you do as well. And it's been a pleasure sort of working with you and sort of chatting over the years. And we've always greatly appreciated your support and kindness and the compassion you bring to this space. And it's a great question. So, you know, we covered Burger Chef, as you mentioned, pretty in depth, and we covered different restaurant homicides in the beginning, then sort of branched out to other things. And you know, I would say that the difference between, when we're talking about a case that was occurred in 1978 and has been unsolved ever since, and there's never been a trial, there's never been really even an arrest, really, like in terms of someone being charged. There's, I think, a perception, at least from us, that a case like that is a little bit less delicate in terms of how you cover it, because it's like, if we report something like some people think this robbery gang did it, it's so old that I think there's a minimal impact in terms of harm we could do on a case, because if there had been a case there, I would have imagined it would have gotten charged years ago. When you're covering something like Delphi, where when we started, it was still unsolved, but relatively new and being actively worked by law enforcement, there's the possibility that by reporting something, you could end up getting people hurt. If you say, hey, police are looking into this guy, and that guy freaks out and does something, that's something you could be putting people in danger. If, there's a sense that it's more delicate, it's more, requires more thoughtfulness in terms of trying to ensure that you're reporting things in a responsible way versus just throwing stuff out there. So I'd say that's the big difference for me.
Okay. I know from the Delphi case that maybe ended up jading me after this case that I didn't have before was I really ended up developing a skepticism in information I would hear about true crime. And it honestly was a shocker to me because of television shows or so-called news shows that operated on, I want to make it like maybe a theory or from a side that it came from rather than making sure it would be evenly coming from both sides. And it was really just shocking to me overall that I watched some things. I don't want to bash them, although I could name them. I do have a list. There's some that I watched though that I was like, I really thought that this was a news channel, for example. And then when I look at the information that was presented, I'm like, being from Indiana, watching this case forever, I'm like, what they're talking about is not true, or they don't have all the information, or they didn't even look into it, or God forbid they were mispronouncing the girls' names. I mean, that's just a minimal of talking about. And I don't know how, was that at all shocking to you guys at all too? I mean, was there a surprise of certain channels or names of people who just weren't sharing correct stuff?
I think it was genuinely shocking. And for me, it culminated in the trial where Anya and I were in that courtroom every day watching what was happening. And we saw the prosecutor put on a case that, frankly, was devastating. And if you were just getting information about the case from YouTube channels or even some of the mainstream media, you were not hearing that necessarily. A lot of sources were acting like the prosecution was doing a terrible job and the case was weak. And because of that, I really feel a lot of people were genuinely shocked by the verdict when, if they'd been aware of all the actual evidence presented, I don't think that would have been quite so surprising to them.
I agree. And I would say there's two categories for me within that. There were people who did not understand. So they would be saying things like, wait, where's the DNA? There's no case without DNA. Where's the murder weapon? You have to have that in order to get a conviction. So there are people who are approaching this from ignorance about how murder trials actually work in the real world, because they're so focused on the big national cases where you can sum it up in a nutshell. You have an elevator pitch, like with Brian Koberger, right? There can be, okay, this DNA found on a knife sheath at the crime scene. So I think for a lot of people, it's like bingo. But with Delphi, it's going to be a more complicated sell. It's more circumstantial. That doesn't mean it's not strong. It just means it's circumstantial and it doesn't have that big flashy piece of evidence. So there's people, but those people are not acting out of malice. They're not used to covering stuff like this. And I think they just didn't really fully comprehend everything. And they took that lack of comprehension and sort of thought, well, this means it's a weak case because it's not meeting my expectations. So that group is one group. And again, that was no malice. There was just no ill intent there. Then there was the group that was smaller but more vocal, where I think people went in there with an agenda and were either shading the truth in order to reflect that, or in some cases were just sort of really almost like completely disregarding the truth. And that was upsetting, because it's like, you know, you're going in and it's not a game, you know, it's not like a sports game where you're saying, oh, like, I want the Eagles to win, so I'm going to say the Eagles are great. I mean, it's like, it's the murder trial for two little kids. Like, let's have some decorum and let's try to go for the truth, no matter what your underlying opinions are, you know?
Right.
And like, we went into the trial with, like, you know, at that point we were like, it's a pretty good case against Richard Allen. That was our belief. But we still said it's possible that the defense will just exceed all our expectations and do a really good job, and maybe something will happen that will change our minds. So we tried to be open-minded in that sense, even though at that point, you know, again, we acknowledged that the case was strong.
Right. I think the one thing I had to keep remembering, because I don't sit here and do go on daily. I on purpose, because there also isn't stuff to report daily on the case. Although there were days that it felt like there was daily stuff going on, but I had to keep also remembering that the timing that other people come into the case. So other people didn't live and breathe this case. If you weren't, even if you're in Indiana, maybe you didn't, but when you lived in Indiana and saw this case turn from missing girls to murder girls, you just had this interest and investment of oh my God, what's happening, what's going on. And that was one thing I kept trying to remind people. The jury didn't hear all of the other previous years of theories and everything popping out. And unfortunately, people would use, old information on an investigative timeline, and people would treat it like it was new. I mean, the obvious stuff that I know you guys dealt with as well was, that was like dealing with Ron Logan and Brad Holder and questioning the family and all, duh. That was 2017. And, if it was that easy and they could have solved it that quickly oh, wow, it was Ron Logan and he put the bodies on his own property and there you go, it's over. And it wouldn't have taken as long as it did to bring him, to find him and bring him to trial, because we just kept trying to identify who is that bridge guy. The timing had to match of who was there at that time. So, so let's do another favorite one that I know is mine and yours, defense team and the documentary. Now, I went back and forth whether I was going to watch it just because I didn't want to get pissed off. I'm just going to be honest about that, of what I would see and if it would be gone one way. But the defense team, this is my opinion, not theirs. I'm speaking it. Send me the hate mail. I'm going to just say they're not the dream team. They weren't the O.J. Simpson and the Casey Anthony, somebody who we thought was guilty and then they got him off because the glove didn't fit type of thing, right? But they went to an Odinism theory, and my God, they were sticking with that Odinism theory no matter what. And I'm not the attorney, so that's why we're glad you married one. Where it's just like, okay, they just needed to present enough to bring reasonable doubt. They didn't have to bring up a solve of who it really is or solve the case. It was, what is the reasonable doubt for Richard Allen? And that they were already recording themselves while they were filing the infamous Frank's hearing, which, again, I'm not an attorney, but I listened to one on a podcast. And I remember asking this question of you, Kevin, where we talked about, okay, isn't the Frank's hearing supposed to be just arguing of not having probable cause to search your house? It's not go into witnesses' names, other people who you think did its names, and what the sacrifice with sticks is for an odinistic killing. So I guess that's a very broad question, the way I just asked it. But when you think of the documentary, when you realize that they were recording from day one, we know because of the Westerfield thing that Baldwin was already reaching out to Dateline early on. What was this for their own publicity, or were they worried about presenting a good case to argue for Richard Allen to be innocent?
Right. And unfortunately, we never were able to talk to the defense attorneys for the book. I mean, we tried very hard to get their perspectives and sort of understand perhaps why they did certain things in order to.
And they told us
fair.
several times that, oh, we'll talk to you after this is over.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen.
Did not happen. And so I think to kind of answer that, we had in the book that they were filming themselves for anticipation of a documentary. And I was a little worried about that because we got it from several sources, but it was like, oh man, but we don't have no one was able to produce footage. But I said, okay, we have it from enough people that I'm confident that this is true. So we included it anyway. But, you kind of get heartburn about stuff like that. And then the Hulu documentary, they break out all this incredibly cringeworthy footage of them. And it's like, oh, okay, we were good. We had it on the money, And, seeing Baldwin, like, this is for Richard Allen. Here's the thing. I remember when we interviewed Sheriff Tony Liggett of Carroll County, he was talking about, workhorses and show ponies and how he tries to be a workhorse and not a show pony. A workhorse being someone who's just doing their job and trying to, do a good job. And a show pony being someone who's kind of out for the attention and the applause and the accolades and kind of preening and primping around. And I think when I look at this defense team, when I look at the prosecution team, I saw workhorses because these people were, keeping their heads down and trying to do a very good job with the law and the case and the facts of the case and presenting it and saving the kind of pomp and circumstance for when it counted in court. And this defense team seemed more intent on portraying themselves as what the public would expect a strong defense attorney to look like versus actually embodying the values and the strategies that you would expect a strong defense attorney to embody. I think for me, that's it. They were, it's like kind of like, let's pose for the rubes, and like these are people who, like, if we act like Perry Mason or Atticus Finch, or like we have this morally righteous crusade, then, people will believe that. And it's like, I think their performance spoke for itself because despite all of this posing and looking, trying to look cool for everybody and trying to cultivate the YouTube crowd, I thought they fell on their faces again and again in a way that was just kind of.
It was disappointing. I would have loved to have seen a better performance from Richard Allen's defense team. I think even on the show, I said sometimes that my bias here is I would love for both sides to have excellent attorneys doing outstanding jobs. And that just didn't happen. They really became emotionally wedded to this Odinism theory, even though they had no evidence behind it. It was just something that kind of sounded sexy and got headlines and attention.
And it's not lost on me. It's not lost on me that, when you put forward, hey, we're uncovering a conspiracy, that's a lot more interesting for a documentary crew than, hey, we're trying to get to reasonable doubt and do everything possible to try to chip away at the state's case. Because when you're the ones uncovering a conspiracy, then you can be the hero of your own story. Whereas if you're just trying to chip away at the state's case and doing what a defense attorney would typically be doing, or even, dare I say, trying to go for a deal, or even, dare I say, coming up with a kind of a quieter but more plausible theory, you're not going to be as interesting for the media to report on or a docuseries to spotlight. You're just going to be someone doing their kind of boring job and trying to do it to the best of their ability. And, with when you're the ones uncovering this whole white supremacist cult that apparently has, upper echelons at the, height of power in Indiana, then, it's a different story and it's a better story for you from your own career. So yeah, the whole thing was just bizarre and not what you'd expect. I don't want people to think that this is like par for the course for defense attorneys. Like, it's not par for the course for defense attorneys. It's like it's defense attorneys are usually, you know, like I think defense attorneys don't get enough respect. I think defense attorneys are incredibly important for preserving everyone's rights, and they do a really important job, and it's a job that can be maligned, but it's a job that people should be happy they're doing. But in this case, it was sort of like stereotypically bad defense attorneying, in my opinion.
I agree.
I think one thing that really kind of showed their true colors was at the very beginning when they were assigned. And that's one thing that, a lot of people don't realize. From the beginning of the murders in 2017, there was a lot of information flowing in Indiana about the case, meaning in just whispers in the general public. And that was because families and community members were out there, part of the search, part of what was going on, part of stuff that was shared. That was also because at the very beginning of the case in 2017, there was no gag order. So anybody who may have been part of a search party or part of this or part of that, people would share this little bit of information or this little bit of information. And that was just like, even the way the girls were murdered, they're like, well, they're not coming out how the girls were murdered. However, people were whispering after the funerals and them wearing scarves and talking about that type of thing. So it was pretty much known that they had been cut. Now a gun and a bullet and all that. Okay, that was a surprise to, most people that they, didn't know about that. But the gag order that wasn't set until after Richard Allen got its defense team, and Gull is talking to them with the prosecutor about the case beginning and talking about, well, we're not going to talk to the media. And the first thing they ran out there and did was talk to the media, and then released a press release. Yeah. So Gull suddenly had to be like, okay, well, now we got to make this a gag order because you're already going out there trying to plead to the public.
And I'll just say it's important for attorneys to try to get along with the judge in the case. That's an important relationship to maintain. You're not always going to agree with what that judge is doing, and maybe sometimes feelings will get hurt, tensions will rise. But I will say, from our observation, this defense team seemed to have no intention of ever getting along with Judge Gull under any circumstances. So that's a bit odd that they would come into it with that level of disregard and aggression, as opposed to, trying to get along and then maybe things don't work out eventually. So it's just odd.
Yeah, I felt like they wanted to get her a new judge right away. I really do. I think that was, I have nothing to really say that. I just feel like from the very get-go, it was a push to try to get it moved farther out and with somebody else they could deal with rather than Judge Gull at the time. But, the other thing that, and I'm going to say this again, this is me bringing up that question, so send the hate mail to me. But what happened to the defense money that was raised publicly? And I guess I would give a shit more if it was my money, but I still give a shit that it's your people's money out there, and that you gave all this money for the misleading of, oh, well, they won't pay for these expert witnesses. Well, guess what? After the trial, you still got the same shitty expert witnesses that they were bringing in the beginning. There was nothing else that happened. And then nobody's asking about where the hell that money went. I don't get it.
I don't understand why people aren't asking this more. And I think it's really like about $40,000 are unaccounted for. It's not pocket change. It's a significant sum. Right. And the Indiana taxpayers footed the bill for what they did.
$1 million of that was just for defense.
I think,
but this fund was from ordinary people donating 50, 100, or what have you amount of money. And that is a considerable amount of money to give. That's a nice meal out. That's a night of the movies or something. And people were giving these things up because they were told that Richard Allen is not being given access to experts when in fact he was. And now all that money just sits somewhere. I'm not sure where it is. We tried to find out. We've heard different stories.
And, we've tried to ask this defense team directly, where is this money? What's going to happen to it now? Because we're not saying anyone stole it. We're not saying anyone's improperly using it. We're just asking where it is and what is it going to be used for now that, that wasn't, what it was made out to be. Right. And we've not gotten any answers. They seemingly don't feel accountable to tell anyone what they're doing with it or explain, which I think they have a responsibility to do so. I think it raises all sorts of disturbing ethical questions that need to be answered. Again, I'm not saying they're doing anything bad with it, but tell people where it is and be honest about that.
Yeah. I mean, once I heard about this extra money being raised, and I was watching what the county was showing for their budget and what was getting approved, and then later, and they wouldn't provide proper receipts, so it was being held up. It wasn't they weren't going to get paid, they just needed to submit the appropriate stuff to get reimbursed for things and that. So I really expected when the trial came up that they would have had, I don't know, a ballistics expert. Or I don't know, maybe
Eric Warren, right?
Maybe people who actually looked at the shit before they came to this, to the up there to testify. It's I never looked at that before this. Oh my God, are you kidding me?
He couldn't look at it because he might have concurred with Melissa Oberg. That was the big, tell there. But
because I'm sitting here going now, I believe that Richard Allen is guilty. I do, but when I'm arguing the case of the defense, hell, even I could have argued a bigger reasonable doubt than they could have, and they didn't even bring up stuff I thought was pretty damn easy to reach to as some reasonable doubt that they could have created, and they weren't. It was stuck on this odinous stuff, and then when they got there, it just seems so, in my opinion, I have a different opinion from one attorney from the other. But Baldwin, I'm not impressed with him. I really am not. I really feel like as big of this case this was, and he wanted to be filmed pressing that button, submitting the Franks here, and then you're not even prepared. You're not prepared. I mean, come on, somebody should be questioning that. But
we were shocked by it.
Yeah, I was genuinely shocked, because this is probably the biggest case he's going to have in his entire career. And we've heard so much about how his opening statements were supposed to be so overwhelmingly powerful. And when it came time for him to do his opening statement, he just got up there and kind of riffed off the top of his head.
You know what he sounded like? He sounded like me when I'm nervously trying to list out things that we're supposed to do for the day, right? Okay, then we have to go to the grocery store. But wait, actually, we also got to go to this first. It was all over the place.
Yeah.
It was just, I don't know.
He reminded me of an 8th grader doing an oral report on a book he hadn't read and was trying to cover up for that. And I just assumed that since it's such a huge case, more preparation would have been done.
Oh, absolutely.
Great Gatsby is about decadence in the 1920s. And it's okay, Wikipedia much. I was not impressed by their entire team. I thought Brad Rosie had sort of the opposite problem. He just was, there's a principle in cross-examination where you're supposed to get to the point, make a good point, and leave the jury thinking about that point. And some of his cross-examinations just dragged on to the extent that it was felt very nitpicky. It didn't feel like he was making a point. It just felt like we're just talking to talk. And I thought overall it was not a good job. It was not what you'd expect from people who should be, ready for biggest case of their careers. And listen, I'm going to say this, having seen the evidence, having looked at all of this, I think that Allen could have had some really good crackerjack attorneys come in and still lose. But, it could have been a loss with some dignity, I think.
Right. Well, I think one thing that is information, which by the way, I'm up to chapter 15, not all the way done, but I'm getting better, which by the way, you can get the book. I got mine on Amazon. They ship pretty decently. We'll be talking about signatures. You guys can go out and meet them in person and get these beautiful signatures. And if you can't meet them, you can go get these little bookmarks and everything mailed to you. You can pre-order all that. But One thing that you guys brought up in the book, which I love, was about the sketches, and you kind of identified in two separate chapters where the first sketch came from and the second sketch from. And I'll let you guys all read that because it defines for everybody what was the first sketch. The first sketch was actually the second sketch, and the second sketch was actually the first sketch. And they go through all of that with you. But one thing I wanted to overly emphasize, because I know I hear arguments from people about this all the time. They didn't use the sketches to identify Richard Allen. And they didn't use the Hoosier Harvester to identify a car. They only used it to corroborate the timing that Richard Allen said he was there. So when you talk about the sketches weren't used and this was mixed up and this came here and this guy's younger and this whatever, it's obvious if you're an older person and you see somebody, and now I have to classify myself as an older person, that you'd be like, oh, there was this young guy. And then if you're a young teenager, hell, everybody's old to you, right? They think 30 years old is old. They think, 50 years old is ancient, whatever. And so you got different people trying to describe that, but they weren't used to identify Richard Allen, and nor was that Hoosier Harvester. And they're like, oh, well, that car's so far away. Okay, yeah, you have the car similar to when they look up, he owns this vehicle. He says he's arriving at this time, and then you happen to look at camera footage that corroborates the vehicle driving by at that same time. Well, there you go. And I think that's, people talk about, well, this information was used and that's horrible. Well, no, that's not what it was used for.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who don't understand rules of evidence and what an investigative tool is versus what's considered evidence in a court of law. So what was testified to, first of all, the sketches didn't come into anything because why would they? The sketches were not, no one looked at the sketches and said, that's Richard Allen. So, I mean, they're irrelevant. They were an attempt to try to get someone in the public to say, I think I know that guy, and to call in a tip. That never happened. Richard Allen tipped in himself. So the sketches are ultimately interesting and certainly a big focus of public attention, but they just don't really matter as far as evidence goes either way. And as you said, different witness sightings they're going to say, well, I think he was older. I think he was younger. But all of the relevant witnesses in this case said, I know I saw Bridge Guy. Even if I thought he looked younger or I thought he looked older, they're saying they saw this guy in this outfit, at the relevant time in the relevant place. And then for the Hoosier Harvester video, you're absolutely right. They're saying this car is consistent with the Ford Focus with the very specific, rim sort of design that Richard Allen's car also had. So it's boxing him into being Bridge Guy, but they're not saying, and, they were cross-examined, to say, well, this other cars could have this, right? Hypothetically in the world. But at a certain point, the jury's looking at what's stacking up. So they're saying, okay, if this was the only piece of evidence against Richard Allen, then yeah, you could say maybe someone with an, identical car came in. But that plus the cartridge plus all of his statements, it's like, at some point you can't be dismissing all of that. So I think it's important to note, what was really said in court. I think people tend to kind of flatten things where it's like they're convicting him based on the car footage. It's like, no,
Right.
No. It's just interesting. I think people, and it's hard. I mean, I get it. It can be hard to say, wait, but they brought it in. Yeah, but here's what they're actually saying, especially if there's no cameras in the courtroom.
I think one thing that in the book that I thought was interesting, something that you guys point out, and I remember when this first came out that they've had the tip for Richard Allen for a long time, although there are people arguing that wasn't a tip and that it wasn't on a sheet and it wasn't blah, 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 blah. But when you talk about, okay, everybody was calling into a line. At the beginning, they were trying to just identify the picture. It wasn't a video, there wasn't sound. It was just a picture of this man who may have information about the girls when it first started. And which was Bridge Guy, obviously, as a still photo. And the Dan Doolin information taken from Richard Allen. And I think one of the things that I learned, so here's a sneak peek, everybody, was the fact that you guys shared that Dan Doolin had recorded other interviews he had, but did not record the Richard Allen one. And I always thought it was very odd. I don't really know why he didn't, that he didn't want to meet at the police station. He didn't want to meet at his own home. And then he didn't even meet at his own work. He had made him drive just a little bit farther down the street to the Save-A-Lot instead of at the CVS. But takes this tip, writes on the back of it about the follow-up and stuff. And I want to make sure I understand. And then, so after that, you mentioned that he corrected the name and he turned in that sheet. Did you get more of a sense of what that process was from Kathy Shank at all? I mean, I know that was at the beginning and there was lots of stuff flowing in of how that process even worked.
Yeah, we talked to people who were working some of these leads over time. And I'm just going to say in the first couple of days, which is when this happened, it was chaos. It's not like, oh, I'm having a busy day at work. It's like you're getting hit with a fire hose of information and tasks, and you're having to run with it. So when people say, how could Doolin forget this? I think it's very understandable because he was doing this all day, had this one conversation with a guy, appropriately filed the paperwork that he needed to, and then went on to do it again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. I think it just blurs together for people at a certain point, especially someone who's not, he wasn't a core investigator. He wasn't someone who was like paying attention to everyone on the trail that day versus, like it doesn't have the same significance that it would, for like Lieutenant Holman or Sheriff Liggett or somebody like that who maybe knows more about all the various witnesses. So that's one thing. So how this would work is investigators would show up and they would just pick up a bunch of lead sheets, and these leads would be, people called something in, and then they would go run the relevant people down, talk to them. The goal was to either clear the lead, and what that looks like is, someone tips in, John Smith. You go to John Smith and he says, wait, I couldn't have done it. I was at work that day. Here's my, here's the relevant, me clocking in, and here's video of me. They would kind of like go to the workplace and make sure someone actually had an alibi, or they'd talk to people who could alibi the person, and then they would clear it. Or if there was more follow-up work to be done, they would, say needs follow-up work, and then they would submit that back in, and then it would be put back into circulation for people to go into more and scrutinize more. So that's what should have happened with this tip. And that's what Dan Doolin did. Right. I mean, he needs more follow-up. Right. But unfortunately it was not, it was cleared, and that it should not have been. That was not Dan Doolin. We don't know who did it.
That was my point, was like even Nicholas McLeland following the case said they never knew who wrote cleared.
I mean, it's terrible, but I mean, I think if we find out who wrote cleared, and we don't know who wrote cleared, if we found out who wrote cleared, it's like, okay, great. So we can all beat up on that person for, writing the wrong thing. It's like, it doesn't matter. The problem, and the thing that needs to be the lesson learned here, the problem was not one person making a mistake. The problem that it was so chaotic, and there were so many people involved that a mistake like that would have been inevitable. And it's very unfortunate, because instead of one of them, 100 or so leads that were just, meaningless nonsense getting misfiled or getting cleared inappropriately, of course it's the lead that mattered.
It's the lead.
The lead.
People were calling up saying, oh, the murderer was obviously a Sasquatch. Why couldn't that lead have been lost? No, it was this one.
No, and I'm gonna say, like,
right, out of all of them.
I think the problem too is people wanted to get involved and they wanted to help, and that was all, not just the public. You know, it was like so many law enforcement officers involved. So it was just, you know, it was it was a managerial disaster for at least those few days. And by the time they got it under control, it was too late.
Yeah.
Right. Big Fish has a question here because it's related to what we're talking about. Was the tip not in Orion as tip 74, or was that a number prior to inputting it into Orion?
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. Sorry.
We'd all be guessing.
Yeah.
I don't want to just say whatever, but I'm not big on the numbers. I'm not going to lie.
So when we were talking about corroborating stuff from Richard Allen, like the Who's Your Harvestor and the timing of everything, of where he was, who he saw, this, you know, that type of thing. It brings me to one of my favorite people that people know out there, and that is dealing with Anthony Schatz and CSAM.
Mm.
And I've covered a lot of men in Delphi who have been arrested for CSAM since the case happened, which have been tons. I have them mapped out. And the shocking number of those. I'm going to make this a two-parter question. What are your thoughts? And maybe this is even a speculation. This isn't, and I know that's not what you guys do. You guys aren't the speculators. You're the fact finding, only telling, confirmation, whatever. But this is maybe somewhat of opinion. That even though Richard Allen is that man, and he is arrested, the odds that Anthony Schatz still was involved in setting up that meeting, setting up that the girls would be there for a Richard Allen. Because here's my thoughts I run on. We don't know what was on Richard Allen's devices that he did get. Their concentration was on the murder. And we know that his 2017 phone is gone. However, on October 13th of 2022, he still had no clue he was going to be looked at. And if he had anything, if he's targeting girls this young, the odds are that he could have CSAM on his phones or devices that he was looking on since 2017, maybe, that he may have. And him rushing out there at the time that he did and going out there from that, and the timing that the girls are going there, and this communication going on, and Anthony Schatz saying, oh, I was going to meet him and she didn't show up. What are your thoughts about that could still be possible, that an Anthony Schatz profile did set them up to meet it, and in some way Richard Allen may have been aware of that, them going to be there because of it?
So I don't believe that's what happened. And I'm going to tell you why. And because everything you're saying sort of, you know, makes some sense, and it's stuff that I've certainly considered. And I'll be curious if Kevin has a different opinion. But for me, we don't have Richard Allen's phone from 2017, which seems very crucial. But we do have all of his other phones. And
right.
There's no evidence of any child sexual abuse materials on any of them. So we'd have to believe that he was just into child sexual abuse materials and into underage girls for a hot minute in 2017, and then got over it and never did it again, which I don't think is usually part of the behavior of people who, you know, are targeting underage kids and are child predators. So he, in his own story, says, he didn't care how old or how young these girls were. So he claims he thought they were older. It sounds like he wanted to go after anyone who was female versus having a specific target age. So first of all, there's no indication that he's specifically after or has a history in terms of young girls. And then the other problem with this is that Kegan Kline, as we all know, he's a guy who is looking out for Kegan Kline. He's a guy who is trying to put Kegan Kline in the best position he can be in. So the idea of Kegan Kline having some information that he could have used as a bargaining chip and not using it and just getting the really hefty sentence he got without making any sort of attempt to kind of deal is extremely unlikely to me. So I think it's the lack of evidence, and I think it's the obviously we can't disprove a negative because we don't have the phones, right?
Yeah, and you can never completely 100% disprove anything. And certainly there's a lot of interesting coincidences there. For instance, on the morning of the murders, Richard Allen went into the Peru area, which is where Kegan Kline lived.
Yeah.
Right.
But in addition to the excellent points my lovely wife made, I would also say that there were a number of investigators who were looking very hard at Kegan Kline. And they did their best to try to find any evidence whatsoever connecting Kline and Allen. And they were not able to find anything.
Yeah, and I think for me, what it goes down to though is like, where's the rest? I mean, I think if they'd found a bunch of CSAM on Allen's other devices, or he had a history of that, I would still be considering this possibility a lot more strongly than I am right now, because absent that, it's like there's no real indication because we know these networks form and they're all sharing the CSAM and they're all doing this. So that would have opened it to the possibility of, oh, he knows another predator in the area. But barring that and not having any indication that he was doing stuff like that, it just it seems like something we can't, I would never say absolutely not, totally discounted, throw everything out the window, but I also don't want to be like, I need evidence for that, I think.
I guess for me that it's not really thinking that if this happened, it would have been Kegan who wanted to do it, as more so, again, this is speculation on my part, and obviously me saying this and not them, where if there was a connection, knowing that Tony Kline had access to those same devices and was using that same persona to speak to people, because that's basically verified. They confirm in court that, it sounds like two people using that. Just, it still just has that part of it. It would make sense to describe Richard Allen's. I just have a hard time believing he just woke up one day, saw his mom and his sister, went in Peru, drank 3 beers, goes home, grabs some stuff, goes to the park. I'm not saying he didn't do it. I'm saying he did. Yeah. But that his point that he got to that point to do it, and then say an age range of, well, they could have been 18 or 19, or they could have been 11. Okay, well, that's a huge difference. 11-year-old versus an 18 or 19-year-old girl. And, that's why it would make sense to me if they went into Richard Allen, all of those devices they found, and at least found that he was into CSAM. You know what I mean? It would make sense to me, I guess, versus he just woke up one day and decided to do it.
I think there's a misperception though about predators. I think people do one and done murders, and that's, from our understanding, that's more common than someone who's necessarily going to be like, in this case, the way I see Richard Allen is this is a guy who's really frustrated about his life and his like lack of agency and own power. Like he's a guy, he's just like a guy who goes to pieces over anything. He can't deal with life, and he needs his wife and mommy to constantly baby him. And I think that can boil into resentment. And I see him as someone who had some kind of power fantasy about raping somebody for years. And eventually it just got to the point where it's like, I'm going to do it, and kind of makes sense that he would be like, I'm going to, drinking some beers. Yeah, today, I'm going to do this right now. And I think that's where I see him. But yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. I was really curious once evidence started coming out, are we going to see any CSAM? And I was maybe surprised is the wrong word, but it was noteworthy to me that they didn't find it.
So for you guys, you feel that the Indiana Internet Crimes Against Children did review all his devices and did not find any CSAM at all.
Yes,
that's our understanding.
That's our understanding. They didn't find anything because he would have been charged. I would imagine
Yes.
they would have added that to the pile.
Okay. Okay. Somebody said, "What's the truth about Richard Allen's phone? It said it wasn't at the trails, but investigators claim that phone is the only one not found. As I understand, the facts are not released."
So if I understand that question right, it's correct that the phone he would have had in 2017 was not found. It's never been found. And what's unusual about that is you could say, well, maybe sometimes people trade in their phones or they lose it or, whatever. What's interesting is that he had all his other phones. Like, he's one of those guys that keeps his phones. Some people do that. Some people trade them in. And the only one they couldn't find was the 2017 one. So that seems notable, right? Mm-hmm. And as for, there's no evidence. So he claimed to investigators that he was on his phone, on his stock ticker app, going around the trails that day. And his phone does not appear on tower data. So, it's just something where it's kind of interesting. But, it's all these things are not necessarily like an immediate, oh my gosh, but it's like it just adds up. It just kind of adds up, adds more questions, I would say.
I agree.
One thing that I know that you guys had shared on your podcast a long time ago of info when it dealt with the water searches going on with Keegan, and you guys were talking about a source that you had that talked about that Keegan had said he was in a red Jeep. Now, I'll tell you, no matter what side you're on, everybody has to agree that Keegan Kline is a liar. Yes. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And we know that maybe a little truth comes out of his mouth, but most of it is always made up stuff. But it did confirm what you said during the trial, because they talked about actually looking into trying to corroborate that story of a red Jeep being on footage and things like that they did talk about going through. One thing you also shared during that was, though, that it was found on Keegan's phone about looking for the Delphi Marathon gas station. And again, people say, why do you believe it? Because Kevin and Anya said so. That's why I believe it. So there you go. That it is information that you also received at the time about that. So that's still pretty interesting of why he would even look for a gas station in Delphi.
I agree. And it's like, why would he be doing that? And that's certainly something we still stand behind. You can understand why Kagan was a huge focus for investigators.
Yeah, there's a lot of smoke there.
And, often when there's smoke, there's fire. In this case, though, what really also intrigues me is that, he's doing all this and there's all this smoke, but then he's not able to direct investigators in a way to the trails that makes any sense in terms of, evidence, like he took them on a route that would have taken them right past the Hoosier Harvest Store video, and there's no red Jeep.
Right. He would have been picked up.
Right. So it's like, and again, like at that point, this was his opportunity to, really kind of do himself some favors. And really kind of have some power over the outcome of his case, I think,
right.
Like, I'll give you information about this murder and, in exchange, perhaps try to make a deal or something. And it just became clear that to these investigators that he was just, he was just making it up as he went along. He was not providing them with anything that was useful. And so I think that it's just very odd. There's this kind of clash between these things that sound like, okay, that's really interesting, and then he's just not able to corroborate any of it.
Right. Well, if
also
he
the
would have said
phones of him and his dad
they
are, I'm sorry, the phones of him at least are in the Peru home during, like at, the day of the murders. So,
well, originally the alibi was supposed to be that him and Tony were together, and then they were at grandma and grandpa's house at 12, 1 o'clock ish. And then I remember in the questioning that they talked about him being not on Paw Paw, but on Country Club Road, which would have been his cousin's house, which is not like it's next door to Paw Paw or to their address at all. So it confirmed that his phone only was at his house, or was it at his cousin's house?
I don't remember the specifics. I do know that, when Detective Vito, I think, testified to it in court when they were kind of discussing the Kagan Klein possibility, it was that, the phone was elsewhere, not at the trails. I mean, obviously, if the phone starts showing up in Delphi, then whoa, like that's
game over.
Game over.
Right.
If the phone is elsewhere, when the day the crime is being committed, then that makes him less interesting.
Well, I mean, but I would just say this on the side, for a person who catfishes girls, though, I would think even he would be smart enough that you don't take your actual phone with you. You take a burner, no matter what. So I don't know that their phones mean anything. Are you guys as shocked as I am that Tony Klein has never been charged with CSAM?
No, I think there's no, while investigators may have the opinion that there's two people who are potentially communicating with girls catfishing on Kagan's devices, there's a difference between having kind of a view of that versus having enough evidence to say this guy's, we can charge this man with these crimes. It's just, and that's the thing with true crime. There's such a difference between what we can all talk about and sort of be interested in and say, hey, there's something here, versus what prosecutors are going to be able to run with. And, there's such a high standard for evidence. There's such a high standard for, being able to deprive someone of their liberty, that I think it's, it doesn't surprise me necessarily, because, certainly they have Kagan over a barrel, right? But
Yeah.
also, if Kagan had been in a position too where he could have possibly, snitched other people out, he didn't do himself any favors by lying so prolifically.
Well, and you can't use Keegan Klein's word to convict anybody.
Exactly.
I mean, his pants on fire, right? While he's trying to tell you that, right? They bring him up to testify. How could you believe anything? I mean, it could be easily said, oh, well, he did it, but he's just trying to throw it on somebody else.
It's a disaster of a
You'd
witness.
have to have way more than that than just his word.
Exactly.
So, my last thing here, Richard Allen's moving. I know that's a big thing a lot of people have talked about. And he got sent over to the processing over for Oklahoma. And then the description, first there was no replies coming out of Indiana Department of Correction. Then finally it came out, and it was a very generic description. Actually, if you Google it, I matched up the wording that they used of, well, we have an agreement with Oklahoma, blah, blah, blah. And now it doesn't appear that he shows up in Oklahoma anymore. So like where's Waldo? Where is Richard Allen?
I don't know, honestly. I mean, we knew he went to Oklahoma, but I don't know.
We've heard rumors, nothing that we've been able to confirm.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, I have no idea.
Well, if you could just let Justice Serve Daily the exclusive on that when that comes out.
You should find him, honestly. I'd be curious. And, it's like, we're going to cover the appeal when it comes out, I'm sure. Stuff like this where I'm just like, who cares where he is? Honestly, like maybe that's bad, but I don't,
Well, I saw that the appeal attorneys have asked for an extension again. I haven't looked to see if it got approved again.
It was approved, and I think they were told that this is their last extension. Yeah. So there's going to be, now there's a deadline in place.
Yeah, because I thought it's like, okay, we'll know by September, but now it's going to be extended beyond that
And
period.
that's normal, to be clear. That's totally normal. That's not unusual that they would be asking for more time. It's a big case with a big record.
Well, after his defense attorneys, we're used to extensions, right?
No, yeah.
How much longer could you have an extension? And I learned that you can file something more than one time. I didn't realize that you could just keep filing it and filing it again and just keep going until hopefully you get the right answer that you want. But, so as we wrapping up here, I can't say enough about how much I really believe that you guys added to the case because of knowledge for the public, including Klein, including interviews with him, including him being looked at, including doing the investigative, I know you say you're not, but the investigative reporting that you do of going out there and speaking to other sources, whether it was co-workers or people who knew people, and all of that outreach and stuff like that, and really setting a high standard. I think that true crime people should attest to, and I will just say, and this is a selfish comment, not all YouTube true crime is bad.
No, of course not.
Some of us are out there good, and we're not trying to be the breaking news detectives, and a lot of us are also not the clickbait that people want to click on and say that. You can tell that from mine. I only bring up what I can tell and prove and show a source. I never bring up something I can't. But I think you guys really have added to that level of standard of what people should expect from that. And that's including, I'm going to say it, court TV. I mean, certain news channels, certain things where they're not sharing that fair side of both avenues. And obviously you guys are going to have your opinion, but you bring fair information on that. You went to talk about defense as much as you talked about prosecution, and you can't help what the facts lead you to. And if the facts lead that Richard Allen was guilty and the jury found him guilty, we can't change that. That's what happened. That's the way it went. And I know you get a lot of slack from some of the, not very many, but my God, louder than anybody else could be, people that are out there, because we get the same trolls too.
Yeah.
Like people who are trying to get the truth out there get the same trolls. So utmost respect to both of you and to the Murder Sheet podcast. I can't say enough about these guys. And again, if you don't like that I had them on, don't come watch me. So you can meet Anya and Kevin at book signings. What dates do you guys have coming up soon? I think you have Greenwood and
I think
Noblesville.
I would say we have a website where I'm going to just read the link because I think that would probably be easiest, where we just list all the events that are coming up. So it's it's murdersheetpodcast.com/events. And you can check out where we're going to come to. And there's some that are ticketed and some that are just people can just come in and get their book signed. But we're really excited about that. And I just want to say, JSD, we respect the heck out of you too. I remember one time, your audience might find this funny. I think at one time, because I don't want to paint YouTube with the broad brush. Sometimes we say all the YouTubers because, there's just a certain clique of them that are terrible, but not all the YouTubers are part of it. And I remember one time I was saying that, and I think I texted you afterwards, like, I wasn't talking about you because I was worried. I was like preemptively like, oh no, I hope she doesn't think I'm talking about all the.
It only hurt me more when Kevin said it because he just
Well,
I felt like he was looking at me while he.
We think you're awesome, and there's a lot of people on YouTube who are doing good work, and that you're absolutely cream of the crop in terms of that, and we just really appreciate you and just how much heart and hard work you've put into trying to keep kids safe and kind of expose some of this terrible, behavior. So we really appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll put that link for the events inside the description of the video. So if anybody, missed that or whatever, Also, I'd like to point out that they are going to be at CrimeCon 2025 in Colorado this year. I have said they should have been there a couple years ago, but what do I know? But I know that the families will be there, and so will Holman, correct?
Right.
That's right. And Nicholas McClelland, the prosecutor.
So that, I'm sure, will be great for people to be out there, and all of you collectively there, and you guys deserve to be out there as well. And I told Anya a long time ago, I was an advocate of, hello, invite the murder sheet. What are you doing? Let's go on. So is there anything else as far as the book, or anything that I didn't ask you that you'd like to share with anybody? And
I think you covered everything.
You nailed it. You always ask great questions, but I think there's nothing that I just want to say thank you so much for this opportunity to come on and talk about the book. We really appreciate it.
Not a problem. I know you have a lot of interviews. I appreciate you giving my channel the opportunity to talk to you guys too.
Sure.
So, and hopefully we'll have you on to discuss another case. So
we'd love it.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. All right.
Bye.
Take care.
All righty. Bye-bye. Well, that was good. We had a hour to move through, and I wanted to keep them on time. So I appreciate them so much. Again, the Murder Sheet podcast. Go listen to them where you listen to podcasts. Check out the book, The Shadow on the Bridge. Yeah, I went through the list of questions that I had, and I know you people were asking about too. And I'm just trying to check out some comments here. Yep. Well, thank you, Big Fish. I appreciate all of you guys being out here. I hope you enjoyed that. I will try to put links and stuff in there for you guys. And if there's something you think later of a question or something that you would like to have me maybe send Anya or Kevin, let me know. But they're pretty easy to get a hold of and very responsive and stuff too. So like I said, I'm on chapter 15 of the book, and I will point out to you guys of different things that I find interesting about the book itself. And I, again, appreciate all of you. Oh my God, you guys are cracking me up. It could be found in King Klein's client list, in my opinion. Anna, too, in my opinion, and you don't have to agree with your people. In my opinion, I feel like there could still be a connection that Anthony Schatz was trying to set that meeting up. And I know what they're saying, but if the phone that Richard Allen had in 2017 is gone, and the history is being erased, the phone that they had, the Key and Klein, one part of their book talks about what stuff specifically that was being searched in Vegas by Keegan, which I did one of those shows about that. But it talks specifically that while he was in Vegas, he was erasing the history on that phone from February 10th through the 15th. And if he doesn't know anything about the case, and he doesn't have anything about the case, and he's looking up Delphi and all that stuff while he's in Vegas, I mean, I just really feel like when you don't have his data, and then you don't, that he was using to talk to Libby, and then you don't have Richard Allen's phone in 2017, how can you connect that? And, I feel like just because Tony's closer in age to Richard Allen, that could be that connection where he was helping him set that up. And the girls have all the signs during that day of that they were meeting somebody. Why did they go straight to the bridge right when they got there? They went straight to that bridge and they crossed it. Abby had never crossed it. And why did, Libby have Abby cross as soon as they got there? They got there, passed by Betsy Blair, walked across that bridge. Why did Libby have a bad feeling about the guy coming across the bridge if she wasn't planning to meet somebody on that other side? I mean, think about that. At first, it could have just been some guys crossing the bridge and whatever. But if they were meeting somebody and he's coming that way, she could have pulled out that phone to record it, because she's like, oh, wait a minute, maybe this is somebody who's faking of what person that they are. And that's why she got that bad feeling from it. Then you've got Richard Allen, who at that particular time drives by the Hoosier Harvester, rushes by 3 other teenage girls that notice him, technically 4, but 3 girls that notice him. Then sees Betsy Blair, doesn't worry. Betsy Blair's completely by herself. And I showed the videos I did on the phones and what was on Libby's phone on the way to the bridge. If you have not seen that episode, go watch that, because it talks about this second communication to an app. Now, every other part, the police identify, this is Snapchat, this is this, whatever. But for some reason, it doesn't with that second message. And that's when she's in the car. Libby and ass biking led to provide cover. Dirty pictures my day about the money account linking Keegan Kline and Libby's account. Yeah, they talked about money from that. And when they investigated to look for, because Keegan Kline didn't have any damn money, but somebody was paying money, and they talked about that he wasn't sending money. But obviously somebody in that account was sending money. I mean, how do we not know that? Could have Richard Allen have access to the Anthony shots? Sure. Could have he used Anthony shots to set it up? Sure. Again, these are in my opinion. I know what, the murder sheet, believes based on evidence and stuff in there. Love the channel. Sad to see them here. Just my opinion. Well, thank you for loving the channel. Just my opinion. Yeah, I think that's how Keegan Kline was making money. And, all the arrests that we ended up in Delphi with CSAM, tons of them. And I know I've shown you guys the locations of where they were all located. Actually, let me see here. I may be able to pull that up for you guys. Pull up Delphi. And I'll show you guys what I'm talking about, just in case. Oh, let's see. For anybody who has not seen the Google Maps of this, I'll let you look at all the people who were arrested for CSAM in Delphi. There we go. And I'll click out of this so you guys can see it better. Hold on, let me pull up for the map so I can share my page. I'll have to do entire screen so you guys can see it. Let me make sure. Hopefully you guys can see this when I click over. Here we go. All right. So if you look, these are marked locations, obviously, but these were all people who were arrested for CSAM. And here we've got Richard Allen's house. There's the Marathon gas station. I will have another show that involves Dan Doolin that you guys will be interested in. Wonder why that's not showing up right there. But we had so many people busted for that. I think the main one that I did was when I did the update with, oh my gosh, Norfleet. When Norfleet got busted, and Logan Lorman. Sorry, just catching up to read here. There was a lot. They were definitely trying to look for predators who were involved, because no matter what, you're still talking, 14-year-old, 13 and 14-year-old girls. Well, I appreciate you guys being here. And I will get the websites updated for you if you'd like to look at any of those. And I appreciate you guys all being here. And thank you for making sure justice is served daily. Bye, guys.